Every 4 years, Americans argue about peace and war. And every 4 years, the country goes to war anyway. Out of 46 US presidents, a shocking number have been wartime commanders. From quick interventions to conflicts that drag on for years, it seems like the Oval Office has a direct pipeline to the battlefield. In fact, since World War II, every single occupant of the White House has managed an America involved in combat, either by inheriting a situation or initiating one. And it's important to clarify, we're not always talking about formally declared wars. These officially stopped generations ago. We're talking about everything, from police actions and covert missions to full-blown invasions. So what's going on here? Is it a coincidence? Or are there powerful underlying forces that pretty much guarantee that any incoming administration becomes a wartime leader? This isn't about good versus bad president or hawks versus doves. The reality is just a lot more complicated. The path to armed conflict is shaped by a mix of systems, expectations, and crises that pull every commander-in-chief, no matter their personality, party, or promises, into military action. It's a pattern that feels woven into the very fabric of the American executive office. To really grasp this, we can't just look at a list of wars. We need to pop the hood and examine the machinery itself. The reasons that quietly steer presidents towards military decisions regardless of their intentions. And together, these pressures don't just make conflict possible, they make it normal. Welcome to Empire's Secrets. No president gets to start with a clean slate. They walk into the office and inherit a world of simmering disputes, tangled alliances, and more often than not, military operations already underway. Making a clean break from a conflict their predecessor launched is incredibly rare. Just look at the 21st century. George W. Bush initiated the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq after 9/11. When Barack Obama took office in 2009, he had campaigned heavily on bringing those wars to an end. He did manage to withdraw combat troops from Iraq in 2011, yet the rise of ISIS, a direct result of instability left behind, forced him back in through a new campaign of airstrikes in Iraq and Syria in 2014. Then came Donald Trump, who also ran on ending America's so-called endless wars. He took on the fight against ISIS, the campaign in Afghanistan, and escalating tensions with Iran. His successor, Joe Biden, was handed that same set of commitments. He ultimately presided over the chaotic final withdrawal from Afghanistan, a war that stretched across 4 different administrations. And then there's the event that exposes the modern presidency's inheritance problem in its rawest form. In early January 2026, the United States carried out a major operation in Venezuela that included strikes and the capture of the country's sitting leader, Nicolas Maduro, with the Trump administration framing it through law enforcement and security language rather than a formal declaration of war. The point isn't the legal framing or the media coverage. The point is the mechanism. Most of the time, each of these men, with entirely different styles and objectives, found himself bound to decisions made by the person before him. And this isn't a recent phenomenon. The Vietnam War, a conflict that defined a generation, wasn't created by a single leader. It was a slow burn, passed down like a toxic family heirloom. President Eisenhower first sent military advisors to Vietnam. John F. Kennedy inherited the situation and increased the number of so-called advisors to more than 16,000, pulling the United States deeper in. After Kennedy's assassination, Lyndon B. Johnson took over, stepping into a crisis where American credibility appeared to be at stake. He escalated the war dramatically, with more than 500,000 US troops deployed by 1968. Richard Nixon then absorbed Johnson's war, promising a secret plan to end it. Yet the fighting dragged on for years under his watch. 4 presidents, all entangled in the same catastrophic conflict. The Cold War essentially created a global chessboard where most confrontations were inherited. The standoff with the Soviet Union was a constant. Passed down from Truman through George H.W. Bush, Truman carried over the aftermath of World War II and almost immediately set the stage for US involvement in the Korean War. Eisenhower was handed down Korea and brought it to a close, but the war logic pushed him to authorize covert actions in places like Guatemala and Iran. Those decisions produced long-term obligations that each new administration felt compelled to uphold. So, why is it so difficult to simply end a war you inherit? For one, withdrawing forces is a logistical nightmare and risks creating a power vacuum. On top of that, there's immense pressure from the military and foreign policy establishment in Washington. These institutions are built around continuity. They present new presidents with strategies framed inside existing commitments. A leader seeking a sharp departure isn't just fighting a political battle, but an institutional one against deeply embedded assumptions about American credibility. The argument is always the same. A sudden exit will betray allies, embolden adversaries, and damage the country's standing. The political cost of being the president who lost a country is enormous. But inherited wars are only half the story. To understand why presidents initiate new conflicts, we have to look at the machinery waiting for them the moment they arrive. On January 17, 1961, in his farewell address, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a five-star general who commanded Allied forces in World War II, gave a chilling warning. He talked about a new force in the American life, the military-industrial complex. He cautioned that the conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience, and that its influence was felt everywhere. His words were a prophecy. Eisenhower's warning points to our third major driver, the powerful economic system deeply intertwined with American war-making. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a self-sustaining structure where the boundary between national security and corporate profits has grown dangerously blurry. Before World War II, the United States didn't have a permanent, oversized arms industry. The Cold War transformed everything. Today, defense is a massive pillar of the US economy. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Raytheon are not just corporations, they are significant political forces. These firms rely on enormous government contracts. To secure them, they spend heavily on lobbying Congress. But their real brilliance lies in dispersing the jobs. A fighter jet isn't assembled in one facility. Its components are produced in hundreds of congressional districts across the country. A single jet contract brings jobs to Texas, but also to Ohio, California, Pennsylvania, and dozens more. That means almost every member of Congress has a personal incentive to support enormous defense budgets to protect employment in their own backyard. How does this push a president towards conflict? First, it produces a state of constant military readiness. The US maintains a vast, high-tech force poised to act instantly. When you have a tool that powerful and expensive, every crisis starts to resemble a situation that demands it. Diplomacy takes time. An airstrike is immediate. The sheer availability of the American military creates a built-in bias towards using it. Second, the system needs a steady stream of new threats. For the economic engine to keep turning, there must be a justification for new weapons. The Soviet Union was the perfect adversary. After the Cold War, people talked about a peace dividend, and the defense budget dipped slightly. But the war on terror provided a new global enemy that legitimized another wave of spending, from drones to armored vehicles. The military-industrial complex doesn't necessarily ignite wars, but it thrives in a world defined by threat and instability. This places any president in a difficult position. Even one committed to cutting the defense budget faces enormous pushback from generals, political hardliners, and a powerful economic coalition. Eisenhower's fear was that this system would grow so influential that national policy could become the captive of a scientific technological elite. His warning was that only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry could keep this machine in check. But even this economic engine isn't the real squeeze. The real squeeze comes from what it demands of the person at the top, the constant need to look strong enough to justify it. The politics of war rarely begin with strategy. They begin with fear, the fear of looking unprepared, uncertain, or weak when the world is watching. And that fear has shaped more decisions than most speeches admit. For that, we have to look at the intense political pressure cooker that pushes a president to appear strong on the world stage. The public, the press, and political rivals all stir the pot, making military force sometimes feel like the safest political move. There's a well-known concept in political science called the rally round the flag effect. It refers to the sudden surge in public approval a president receives during an international crisis. When a nation feels threatened, people tend to set divisions aside and unite behind the person in charge. The textbook example is George W. Bush after 9/11. His approval rating hovered around 51% before the attacks. In the weeks that followed, it skyrocketed to an unprecedented 90%. That dramatic spike handed him enormous political latitude to launch the war in Afghanistan and later move into Iraq. And this effect isn't rare. George H.W. Bush watched his support climb sharply after the first Gulf War. John F. Kennedy's numbers jumped following the Cuban Missile Crisis. Together, these moments create a tempting, if deeply cynical, incentive. There's a scene that almost never shows up in speeches or memoirs, but it plays out every time a foreign emergency erupts. Picture this. It's late. Polling data sits on the table. Tomorrow's headlines are already taking shape. Advisors line the walls, all focused on the same screens. One option is slow and uncertain: diplomacy, restraint, and the risk that nothing visibly changes. The other is immediate: aircraft already in position, a strike that could be announced before dawn, a response that fits neatly into a headline. In that room, the real calculation is rarely whether force will succeed, it's whether restraint can survive the next news cycle. And more often than anyone admits, the decision hinges on the fear of appearing absent while events seem to move on without you. There's even something known as the divisionary theory of war. The idea that a leader with sinking approval might provoke a foreign crisis to redirect attention and trigger that rally effect. An external showdown shifts coverage away from a weak economy or a domestic scandal. It allows the president to look decisive, commanding, and firmly in control. Beyond polling, there's a deeper historical bias at work. We tend to associate wartime leadership with presidential greatness. Historians and the public consistently rank figures who governed through major wars, like Lincoln and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, among the most significant leaders in American history. That creates a subtle gravitational pull. A president who oversees peace and prosperity earns respect, but one who navigates a massive conflict is seen as truly historic. The flip side is the enormous danger of appearing weak. Political opponents are always poised to attack any sign of hesitation. During the Cold War, being labeled soft on communism was politically fatal. Today, being seen as insufficiently tough on terrorism carries a similar threat. Lyndon B. Johnson is a tragic case study. He privately loathed the idea of escalating in Vietnam, but he was haunted by the fear of becoming the first American president to lose a war. He believed that if he withdrew, his rivals would tear him apart, and his Great Society agenda would collapse. Feeling cornered, he chose escalation, a decision that ultimately consumed his presidency. The 24-hour news cycle only intensifies the pressure. A foreign crisis can dominate screens for weeks, with commentators demanding action. A president who urges patience can appear indecisive, while one who authorizes an airstrike looks resolute. The image of the president in the Situation Room is politically priceless. In that environment, taking military action, despite its real-world risks, often feels like the path of least political resistance. And once that pressure takes hold, it doesn't just shape choices, it reshapes motives. Because in Washington, incentives don't sit alone. They connect to something far bigger and far more permanent. The final and perhaps most fundamental reason presidents end up at war is a major shift in the structure of American government. Over the last century, the authority to initiate war has slowly migrated from Congress, where the Constitution placed it, to the executive. This evolution has produced what historians call the imperial presidency, a commander-in-chief who can effectively wage war whenever and wherever they judge necessary. The US Constitution is explicit. Article 1, Section 8 grants Congress, and only Congress, the authority to declare war. The founders were deeply wary of the concentrated power and wanted to prevent a single individual from wielding monarch-like control over armed conflict. The president is designated commander-in-chief, but that role was intended to mean leading the military after Congress authorized war. For much of American history, this balance held. Congress issued formal declarations for the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, and both World Wars. But the inflection point came in 1950. When North Korea invaded South Korea, President Truman ordered US forces into combat without congressional authorization, labeling it a police action. This marked the first major undeclared war in US history, and it established a dangerous precedent. Congress largely allowed it. That exception gradually became standard practice. During Vietnam, Lyndon B. Johnson never sought a declaration of war. Instead, he relied on the vague Gulf of Tonkin Resolution as an open-ended mandate. By the 1970s, Congress attempted to reclaim its authority. In 1973, it passed the War Powers Resolution over President Nixon's veto. The law was meant to restrain the executive, requiring notification before deploying troops and imposing a 60-day limit without congressional approval. On paper, it looked effective. In practice, it has failed. Every president since Nixon has ignored it, contested it, or reinterpreted it to suit their objectives. They argue that their authority as commander-in-chief allows them to use force to defend American interests, full stop. And Congress has been complicit. It retains the ultimate check, control over funding. It could refuse to finance conflicts it doesn't support, but doing so is framed as unpatriotic. So, time and again, lawmakers criticize presidential actions while approving the budgets that sustain them. The war on terror accelerated this trend dramatically. After 9/11, Congress passed a broad authorization for use of military force. It empowered the president to pursue those responsible for the attacks. That 2001 AUMF, originally aimed at Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, has been stretched for more than 2 decades by multiple administrations to justify operations across the globe against groups that didn't even exist on 9/11. It has effectively become a rolling worldwide permission slip for force. The result is a presidency with vast, largely unchecked military authority. The constitutional guardrails designed to make war a slow, deliberate decision have steadily eroded. The path to conflict is no longer a steep ascent requiring broad consensus. It's a smooth downward slope, with the president standing at the top. The route from the White House to the battlefield is well worn. It isn't just a story of individual judgment, but of a system that channels presidents towards confrontation. They inherit wars. They operate inside a political pressure cooker. They oversee a massive military-industrial complex. And finally, they wield the powers of the modern imperial presidency, where constitutional restraints on war have largely vanished, leaving the choice to use force concentrated in one office. Together, these 4 forces create a powerful vortex, pulling presidents of every party and personality toward war. It ensures that Commander-in-Chief isn't merely a title, but an active, recurring role. So, is it possible for a president to break the cycle? Or has the office itself become so entangled with the machinery of war that peace is the exception and conflict the norm? That remains the central and deeply unsettling question of the American presidency. Before we close, it's worth pausing on something hard to acknowledge, because once you recognize this recurring behavior, it changes how you listen to presidents. It changes how you hear campaign pledges. It even reshapes what the word leadership implies. When a candidate promises to be tough, restrained, or different from the last one, it sounds like a choice. But what this framework quietly reveals is that many of the real decisions were made long before they arrived. The machinery is already running, the incentives are already aligned, the risks are already distributed in ways that can make certain actions safer than others. So when a president authorizes force, the question isn't always why did they want this, but what were they able to avoid? What political damage evaporates the moment action is taken? What criticism falls silent? What uncertainty is deferred? And maybe that's the most disturbing part. Not that war occurs, but how rarely we're asked to notice how easily it does. Because if war has become the default condition of the office, then voting becomes less about steering outcomes and more about choosing which version of inevitability feels most tolerable. Different language, different tone, the same structural gravity. That doesn't mean individual decisions are irrelevant, they matter. But it does mean responsibility is more diffuse than we like to admit. And if that's true, then the most important question isn't whether the next president will lead us into conflict, it's whether the system we've built still knows how to do anything else. If this way of viewing the presidency resonates with you, you'll probably want to keep pulling on these threads. That's what this channel exists for, stepping back from the headlines and examining the structures underneath them, the incentives, the pressures, the systems that repeat even when the names change. If you want to stay with these conversations, you can subscribe, not for alerts or updates, but so these deeper dives keep appearing when you're ready for them. And if you have a different viewing of any of this, or think one force matters more than the rest, the comments are open. That's where these ideas actually get tested. This was Empire Secrets. Your desire, your empire.